Hello and welcome to Talking Tolkien. For the first in my series on the peoples of Middle-earth, I will be looking at one of the most revered and powerful elves ever to have lived, the one and only, the mighty High King Ereinion Gil-galad. Though Gil-galad was born in the First Age, his deeds were so great that he was still known throughout Middle-earth in the Third Age. In The Lord of the Rings, as Aragorn leads the hobbits up towards Weathertop, he mentions that this was the place where Elendil looked out for Gil-galad coming from the west, in the days of the last alliance of men and elves, at the end of the Second Age. Sam has heard of Gil-galad in one of Bilbo's tales, and sings,
Gil-galad was an elven king, of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free, between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star, in Mordor where the shadows are.
First of all, let's get some contradictions about Gil-galad's parentage out of the way. Up until he completed The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien had intended that Gil-galad was to be the son of Finrod Felagund, king of Nargothrond, and that Galadriel was his sister, and therefore Felagund's daughter. However, when Tolkien later wrote that Felagund had no wife, this version of events could no longer work. Realising his misjudgment, he later made Gil-galad the son of Orodreth, who was the nephew of Gil-galad's original father, Felagund. Orodreth was also the king of Nargothrond, succeeding Felagund. This was Tolkien's final amendment to Gil-galad's lineage. When Christopher Tolkien was assembling the Silmarillion from his father's notes and works, he discovered a note in the margins of the writings suggesting that Gil-galad was the son of Fingon the Valiant, who was a high king of the Noldor in Beleriand. Indeed, that is what was published in the Silmarillion in 1977. However, in The Peoples of Middle-earth, published in 1996, Christopher Tolkien noted that, after an additional 20 years of combing through his father's manuscripts, he now realised he had made an error making Gil-galad the son of Fingon, but to alter it would have meant that Gil-galad could never have been a High King of the Noldor, and to correct this would have involved taking more liberties with his father's text than he was prepared to do. In Christopher's words, it would have been very much better to have left Gil-galad's parentage obscure. So, taking heed of Christopher's words, we'll not worry any more about Gil-galad's lineage, and we'll move on to the history of his long life. Gil-galad was born in the First Age at a time that Morgoth, the first Dark Lord of Middle-earth, was waging battles against the Elves of Beleriand, also known as the War of the Jewels. After the Dagor Bragollach, or Battle of Sudden Flame, in which Fingolfin, the High King of the Noldor, was slain by Morgoth, Gil-galad was sent for his safety to Cirdan at the Havens of the Falas, which were two great walled coastal cities that had, because of their impressive defences, already held out against the onslaught of Morgoth's forces. However, Morgoth's power increased, and the watchtower and fortress known as Minas Tirith on the Isle of Tol Sirion fell, not to be confused with the later Minas Tirith in Gondor. This led to the destruction of Gil-galad's home in Hithlim in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, or Battle of Unnumbered Tears, and consequently the Havens of Falas could no longer withstand Morgoth's force, resulting in the destruction of the cities of Brithombar and Eglarest. Though the Havens were overrun, Gil-galad was able to take a ship with Cirdan and a large number of other elves to establish secret refugee camps on the Isle of Balar and the mouths of Sirion. During the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Fingon, the High King of the Noldor, was killed by Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs, and the kingship passed to his brother Turgon, who lived in the hidden elven city of Gondolin. Turgon's 39-year reign as king ended during the fall of Gondolin, as he was crushed by the collapsing of his own tower. The title of High King of the Noldor then passed to Gil-galad in 510 of the First Age, and he spent the rest of the First Age with Cirdan in the refuges on Balar and the reeds of the mouths of Sirion. After the War of Wrath and the destruction of Beleriand at the end of the First Age, Gil-galad was one of the few elves who elected to stay in Middle-earth and not sail into the west. At the start of the Second Age, Gil-galad established the kingdom of Lindon around the Gulf of Lune, in the only region of Beleriand that survived the War of Wrath. One of the main havens built here was Mithlond, which translates to the Grey Havens, from where Gandalf, Elrond and Galadriel would later sail for Valinor at the end of the Third Age. Gil-galad was joined in Lindon by many of the surviving elves who had remained in Middle-earth, in particular the Noldor, of whom Gil-galad was their king. Over time, tension grew between the Noldor and the Sindar clans of elves in Lindon, resulting in many of the Sindar relocating into the east, to dwell with the Sylvan Elves or Wood Elves, who shared their language of Telerin. Additionally, a group of Noldorin elves left Lindon to settle in Ereinion in 750 of the Second Age, including Galadriel, Celeborn, and the Noldorin craftsman Celebrimbor. Gil-galad developed good relations with some of the first Númenóreans to explore Middle-earth, led by Prince Aldarion, who would later become 6th King of Númenor. In 882 of the Second Age, Gil-galad gave Aldarion a letter to take to his father, Tar Meneldur, the 5th King of Númenor. The letter revealed that Gil-galad suspected that a new shadow was arising in the east, and that it was deemed to be a servant of Morgoth, who had been defeated at the end of the First Age in the War of Wrath. Sensing the size of the threat facing the men and elves of Middle-earth, Gil-galad asked for assistance from the men of Númenor. Around 1000 of the Second Age, a mysterious spirit in the form of a man appeared in Middle-earth, calling himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, posing as an emissary of the Valar, sent to aid the elves. Though he befriended the elves of Ereinion, the elves of Lindon refused to deal with him, as Gil-galad distrusted him. Whilst in Ereinion, under Annatar's guidance, the Rings of Power were forged, and Annatar was revealed to be Sauron himself who forged the One Ring in secret. When Celebrimbor realised he had been misled, he sought counsel from Galadriel, who told him that they must ensure the 3 elven rings were as far as possible from Ereinion, where Sauron believed them to be. Galadriel kept Nenya herself at Lothlorien, while Narya and Vilya were given to Gil-galad at Lindon. At some point, either immediately after this or before the War of the Last Alliance, Gil-galad gave Narya the Ring of Fire to Cirdan, Lord of the Havens, but when exactly is unclear. When Sauron realised that Celebrimbor had betrayed him and hidden the elven Rings of Power, he declared war on the elves, and learnt from his interrogation of Celebrimbor the locations of all the Rings of Power, except for the elven rings, which Celebrimbor would not reveal. Sauron guessed, rightly, that they had been trusted to the safest elven guardians on Middle-earth, and that meant Galadriel and Gil-galad. As Sauron launched his attack against the elves of Ereinion, Gil-galad sent an army to aid the elves, commanded by Elrond Half-Elven, though by the time Elrond arrived, he saw that the battle was already lost, and he would have himself been defeated had not the dwarves of Khazad-dûm attacked Sauron at the same time. Elrond then retreated to the north and established Imladris, or Rivendell, in the Misty Mountains as a refuge from Sauron. Though Sauron was determined to take Gil-galad's Rings of Power by force, the risk of Elrond attacking the rear of his army was too great, so he waited. In the meantime, Aldarion, now 6th King of Númenor, had heeded Gil-galad's words about an increasing threat from the east, and had become a great shipbuilder and begun to amass a powerful force at the havens in Lindon. He and Gil-galad enjoyed good relations, and Tar Aldarion gave some nuts from malon trees, which grew in the western part of the island of Númenor. Though Gil-galad unsuccessfully attempted to grow malon trees in Lindon, he also gave some to Galadriel, who eventually planted them in Lorien when she came to settle there. Under her power they bloomed and grew to be almost as tall as the trees in Númenor, and led to Lorien being known as the Golden Wood. Many years passed before Sauron attacked Eriador with force in 1695 of the Second Age. Gil-galad called for aid from his allies in Númenor, and Talminastir, the 11th king of Númenor, sent out a great navy to assist, but by 1700 it had still not arrived. By then, virtually all of Eriador had fallen to Sauron, except for Rivendell, which was besieged, and the Grey Havens, which were defended by Gil-galad. Eventually Sauron closed in on the line of the River Lune, and rallied his forces for a final onslaught against the Grey Havens. Defeat looked inevitable for Gil-galad and the Númenorian army, and it was in this darkest hour that Tilminastir, having been delayed, arrived in force, driving Sauron back and inflicting heavy losses on the Dark Lord's army. Sauron was pushed back to the southeast by the rallying forces of Gil-galad and Talminastir, and suffered another heavy defeat at Sarn Ford. As Sauron retreated further south, another Númenorian naval force joined the battle, devastating Sauron's forces, with Sauron himself barely escaping with his bodyguard to Dagorlad. He then returned to Mordor, broken and humiliated. There was now peace for a time in Eriador, and the Númenorians built settlements along the western coasts, with the threat of their power forcing Sauron to remain in Mordor. At this time, with Elrond maintaining the elven stronghold at Rivendell, Gil-galad gave to Elrond his Ring of Power, Vilya, the Ring of Air. Realising he could not beat the Númenorians by force alone, Sauron allowed himself to be captured and taken prisoner to Númenor. There he worked his wicked schemes, resulting in the sinking of the island of Númenor and the destruction of the great Númenorian navy. Sauron's spirit returned to Mordor, where he began to regain his strength. By this time, to Sauron's dismay, Gil-galad's power had dramatically increased, though he had never married nor had children to establish an heir to the throne. A small number of faithful Númenorians, who had not been corrupted by Sauron, led by Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion, escaped the flooding of their home and settled in Middle-earth, founding the kingdoms of Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south. Gil-galad befriended Elendil, and in time they decided that the only way to stop Sauron increasing in strength and ultimately overcoming all of his enemies was to unite against him. This was the beginning of the War of the Last Alliance. Gil-galad, Elendil and Cirdan then marched east with an army of elves and men that was said to be fairer and more splendid in arms than any that has since been seen in Middle-earth. After halting at Rivendell for 3 years, they crossed the Misty Mountains and continued down the River Anduin, gaining allies as they went, elves from Greenwood and Lorien, dwarves from Moria, and men from Gondor. It was then that they met Sauron's army in the year 3434 on Dagorlad, the battle plain, at the gate of the Black Land. The might of Gil-galad and his elven host, combined with the raw power of the strong and tall Númenorians, was too much for Sauron's army. Faced with Aeglos, the mighty spear of Gil-galad, and Narsil, the sword of Elendil, which was said to shine with the light of the sun and of the moon, the evil wilted. Gil-galad and Elendil then pressed on into Mordor, laying siege to Sauron's stronghold of Barad-dûr for 7 years. In this time they took heavy losses, and Anarion, son of Elendil, was slain. Eventually, Sauron himself took to the battlefield, with Gil-galad and Elendil registering many grievous wounds in combat with Sauron. Alas, in this battle Elendil was slain, and Gil-galad was burned to death by the heat of Sauron's hand. The damage they inflicted on Sauron enabled Isildur, son of Elendil, to take the hilt shard of his father's sword Narsil and cut the One Ring from the hand of Sauron. This act vanquished Sauron, and his spirit fled far away. With this brave sacrifice, one of Middle-earth's greatest elven warriors and the final High King of the Noldor, Ereinion Gil-galad, passed to the halls of Mandos and was never seen again in Middle-earth. And so ends the tale of Ereinion Gil-galad, the star of bright light and final High King of the Noldor. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to my channel by using the G rune here. Apart from that, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone whose art appears in this video. There's such a huge number of talented artists out there, and I'm proud to be able to draw on some of those works in this video. Until next time, thanks for watching Talkin' Tolkien.